how significant, first of all, is the result for Labour?
Well, if you're listening to Keir Starmer, it's seismic. I think a few things to keep in mind. One, this is the first major election, Ruth David, that they've had since March, when a very popular leader, Nicola Sturgeon of the SNP, stepped down. And this Scotland, the seats have always alternated between SNP and Labour. Absolutely, this is a big comeback for Labour, but it's one seat in a special election, and they're putting a lot of weight on it. But if you look at what the bookies were saying and what the strategists were saying, if they hadn't won it, it would have been a huge headache for Keir Starmer, especially going into their annual conference over the weekend. So I think we have to put it into the context of what's happening in the broader scenario. Labour is kind of clawing back some of the gains in Scotland, where their opposition to holding another referendum and going back to the European Union had undercut their wins. But the SNP is facing its own struggles, right?
Yeah, and this is, you're right. If they hadn't done it, that would have been a huge story, and it would have put a lot of question marks surrounding Labour. So what are we expecting from the party conference that starts on Sunday?
He's going to start it on a high note, absolutely, and lay out his strategy for winning the elections next year. Labour is still polling 20 points ahead of the Conservatives in the polls, so they have that kind of lead for them. But, the UK's election of first past the polls, the way that they gain victory in Parliament means that just because they're polling this much higher is not a certainty, and they still have a long way to go. I mean, some of the economic headwinds that are facing Rishi Sunak, and when we're talking about just how much room do you have to give away fiscal, like tax benefits, or to cut taxes, or to do any of these things, the economy and the state of it is going to stay the same. So voters will be thinking very carefully, if we get Labour into power, what changes for us? And unless they can come up with a coherent plan of what really changes to make voters' lives better, I think that discontent is something that might colour both parties.